Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
We try to be global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sundays on CNN.
I'm Hadas Gold in Jerusalem, and this is CNN.
The Justice Department appears to be widening its probe into the fake elector scheme the former president's campaign tried to use to overthrow the election. A day after the January 6th committee presented evidence for the first time directly linking the former president to the scheme, the Justice Department has now issued subpoenas to individuals in a number of states, including the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. David Schaefer is his name, and he's said to have played a central role in organizing the slate of fake electors from Georgia and coordinated the effort with the former president's campaign. We'll have more of that in a moment. We'll also talk to Jocelyn Benson tonight. She's the Michigan Secretary of State. You may have seen during Tuesday's hearings, she spoke about how the election fraud conspiracies fueled by the former president ended up with angry protesters just outside her house screaming. And later, the school's police chief in Uvalde, Texas, put on leave. We'll have the latest into the investigation of the police response to the Robb Elementary School mass shooting. We start with those Justice Department subpoenas and our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raja. What more do we know now about these subpoenas?
Yeah, this is actually a significant escalation by the Justice Department, which is investigating this fake elector scheme and has been focused on mostly lower-level Republicans up until this point. But our colleagues have now learned that there has been a subpoena issued for David Schaefer. He's the Republican Party chairman in Georgia. And he also played a significant role, central role, in coordinating with the Trump campaign over its efforts to try to find these so-called fake electors that would essentially try to deny Joe Biden an electoral victory when the joint session of Congress met on January 6th to count the votes from each state. Now, we also are learning that there were several other states that were subpoenaed by the Department of Justice, individuals involved with that effort, not just Georgia, but also Michigan and Pennsylvania. And of course, those three states are states that Donald Trump lost. A sign here that this probe that lawmakers on Capitol Hill have called for to go at a quicker pace is broadening. The question is how broad and when, what will eventually come of it, Anderson.
Why has the committee postponed next week's hearings?
There is one Democratic Congressman, Jamie Raskin, told me earlier today, a quote, deluge of new evidence. They are citing a number of new developments that have come up over the last several days, including subpoenaing footage from a documentary filmmaker, Alex Holder, a British filmmaker who had followed around Ivanka Trump and also had exclusive interviews with Donald Trump on and around January 6th. And they're meeting with him behind closed doors tomorrow. And Anderson, they also said they have new information from the National Archives, as well as new tips that have come in through their tip line that they're trying to run down. So the committee is reassessing how it plans to present this new information and how much of it will come out. So ultimately, Anderson, there were expected to be hearings that would wrap up next week. Now those will be pushed into July.
Earlier in our last hour, we played the moment you asked Senator Ron Johnson about this whole fake electors controversy yesterday. He clearly didn't seem eager to talk to you. Has he had any more to say?
In fact, we asked him today, my colleague Ted Barrett asked him whether or not he, in fact, asked his aide any more information about this. He told me yesterday he had no information, no idea who was providing this fake electors to his office, in which he would try to provide to Mike Pence on January 6, 2021, if Pence had agreed. He said he had no idea who that person was, and he told our colleague Ted Barrett today that he wasn't going to ask any more questions about it because he called it a non-story. And when also asked whether or not he looked inside that envelope that included information about that fake electors. He said, no, I don't believe I did. So Anderson, a lot of questions about why he accepted information that was not vetted, says he doesn't know where it came from, says it might have came from a House intern initially that ultimately ended up in his chief of staff's hand, and they made the offer to go to the vice president of the United States just before a joint session of Congress. No real explanation from the senator, and he's also very clear he doesn't want to get to the bottom of it.
I mean, I'm sorry, this is just ridiculous. This is the lamest thing I've ever heard. An intern forwarded a phony slate of electors to Ron Johnson's office, and his chief of staff, without consulting with Ron Johnson, approached the vice president's staffer on the most important day, probably in the vice president's career, on a critical day in American history, with fake electors. And on top of that, Ron Johnson says he still doesn't know, and he's not going to ask any questions of anyone in his office about how this happened. I mean, just in terms of office management, wouldn't you want to figure out how it was possible that some unnamed intern is able to pass along a document to your chief of staff, who then directly tries to, I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, you know, he also said that he did the right, his chief of staff did the right thing, even though he didn't exactly know who was behind this effort. He says
he doesn't know what the chief of staff did, but he did the right thing, and he's not going to look into it anymore. I mean, it's amazing. Manu Raju, I don't know how you do what you do. I appreciate it, though. Thank you. Much of Tuesday's hearing dealt with the intimidation tactics and threats of violence state election officials faced after election conspiracies promoted by the former president. Now, one of those who spoke to the January 6th committee is Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who, as we noted earlier, had angry protesters outside her house screaming at her, alleging all sorts of things, video of which was shown during the hearing.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! You're a threat to democracy! You're a threat to free and honest election! We love America! We love our rights and our freedom!
Joined now by Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, also CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI. Secretary Benson, I mean, the video of people protesting outside your home, I mean, I don't care what side of the political aisle or somebody is on, the idea of protesters going outside their homes screaming at them in the middle of the night just seems ridiculous to me. It obviously can't even capture the full scope of what it must have felt like to actually have that happen to you. What is that? How do you describe that?
As I said to the committee, the uncertainty. I mean, everything that unfolded minute by minute, we didn't know was going to happen next. And for a full 45 minutes, all that stood between my family and those on the street was one neighborhood security guard. And it wasn't just my house. It were, you know, my neighbors who also have kids in the middle of the night hearing these things shouted outside their windows. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. But at the same time, I also vividly remember feeling, recognizing that these folks, they weren't protesting me as a person. They were protesting our elections, our democracy, the will of the people in the state of Michigan. And through that recognition, I found strength to keep doing my job, and make it through that scary moment. But it wasn't easy, and it's something, even hearing the videos and the sound, it still is unnerving to recall. And
Andrew, I mean, can any legal action be taken against people making threats in support of the former president's election laws? I mean, does it depend on the state or on some of the threats? For example, the one that Congressman Kinzinger recently disclosed, new threats against, talking about executing his family, or new threats against other members of the January 6th committee. Is that a federal matter?
Well, you certainly can't threaten a member of Congress. That alone would make it a federal matter. You can't threaten people with acts of violence really anywhere. There's all kinds of federal, but even more importantly, state laws that might violate. The sensitive thing in this circumstance, which is horrific, and I can only imagine how disturbing it was, having myself been the target of some, certainly not that bad, but some activity kind of right out in the street in front of my house at different times. I understand how terrible that is. But because it inextricably involves political speech, authorities have to be very careful about limiting what could be considered lawful protest in a public space. You have First Amendment protected activity, you have freedom of association. So there are some sensitive constitutional issues here. Now, that doesn't give people the right to make a massive scene in front of someone's house in a neighborhood late at night. There can be local ordinances against noises and things like that could come into play. So it's a very kind of complicated analysis for law enforcement on the ground responding to an incident like that.
Secretary Benson, I want to ask you about these new subpoenas from the Department of Justice regarding the fake electors. We saw this in Michigan. What are the questions you have? I mean, we want to play this video from outside the Capitol in Michigan when people who were claiming to be electors were trying to get into the building, which is just, I mean, it's worth watching. Let's take a look.
They're also electors are inside. All 16 electors that we've been advised by the governor's staff that we're going to be here to vote in the Electoral College have been checked in. They're already here.
But the GOP electors. These are the rest of the electors.
I mean, it's ludicrous and almost comical seeing that, but I mean, this is really serious. This was a scheme, that we're learning more and more about. Do you think the country fully grasped just how dangerous and crazy this whole thing was?
I hope so. I think that's part of what the truth and the granular details that the committee hearings are unveiling is meant to accomplish. I mean, this was not a hypothetical idea. This was an actionable plan to physically disrupt the electoral process and subvert the will of the people in Michigan, which was clear and unequivocal. And the second thing to note is that these are folks, including the people outside my home, they're motivated by a lie, by misinformation, by falsehoods that had been told to them by people trying to, again, subvert the will of the people and overturn the results of a legitimate election. So it wasn't just people were upset about the results, they were acting on a lie. And we have to remember that when we continue to hear candidates lie today, that can transform into these actionable plans to overturn an election and threaten election officials.
Yeah, Jocelyn Benson, Andrew McCabe, appreciate it. Thank you. More to come on the hearings, including the man who wasn't there, Pat Cipollone. The former president's White House counsel has refused to testify before the committee, even after a plea by Republican committee member Liz Cheney. We'll talk about what he may know and whether he would ever testify. Later, the embattled schools police chief in Uvalde, Texas, no longer in charge. We'll have the latest and a live report from Texas when we come back.
We share this place, we all belong. We have to restore this planet's soul. Teach it something more than what we know. Give it water, give it sun, room to grow. I can see a better tomorrow. I can see a better tomorrow.
5 years ago, and we decided that we wanted to have a Freshman Academy community service project, and we decided part of that was going to be working with spreading awareness of modern day slavery.
At the end of your presentation, you need to tell me how that issue connects to your poem.
There's probably 300, 400 kids in the Freshman Academy. We had all of their core teachers make sure on My Freedom Day that they were teaching about that topic. And now we've got not just our core classes doing it, but also our elective classes.
Okay guys, so this is what we're going to do today as far as packing. You are going to grab a Ziploc bag, and then you are going to start here.
So when we first started this was exclusively for the freshman class, but it was such a hit with all of the classes that every year we've grown and added the classes in, so now it's a school-wide event.
And who are you helping?
So we have two groups, and both of those organizations work towards ending human trafficking or helping those that are in need. It's been amazing because our students have really embraced the idea of learning about modern slavery and embrace the idea of what is human trafficking, how it has impacted them, and it's been a very popular topic to learn about and to participate in.
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
One of the biggest moments of Tuesday's hearing involved someone who wasn't there, the former president's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. Today, the end of the hearing, Vice Chair of the committee, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, appeared to speak directly to him about why they wanted him to testify.
The American people have not yet heard from Mr. Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. Our committee is certain that Donald Trump does not want Mr. Cipollone to testify here. Indeed, our evidence shows that Mr. Cipollone and his office tried to do what was right. They tried to stop a number of President Trump's plans for January 6th. Today, and in our coming hearings, you will hear testimony from other Trump White House staff explaining what Mr. Cipollone said and did, including on January 6th. But we think the American people deserve to hear from Mr. Cipollone personally. He should appear before this committee, and we are working to secure his testimony.
Joined by CNN Chief Legal Analyst Jeffrey Toobin, a former federal prosecutor, and CNN political analyst and journalist Carl Bernstein, author of Chasing History, a Kid in the Newsroom. Jeff, on what grounds can Cipollone refuse to testify? I mean, is it entirely his decision, or is it, I mean, he was White House counsel. Can you just say there was executive privilege?
You know, as a practical matter, it is his decision. You know, he is not a private lawyer, so there is not attorney-client privilege the way there is for a private lawyer. Executive privilege can be gotten around, but what I mean by as a practical matter is there's no time to litigate this. Even if the committee wanted to subpoena him and then force him to testify, the clock would run out. So this is really entirely up to Cipollone, and it sounds like he's just not going to do it.
Carl, how realistic do you think it is that he would agree to testify, even with this public cajoling by Liz Cheney?
The committee knows from those who are closest to Cipollone, from his aides, an awful lot of what Cipollone would say. And it is extremely damning, because what the committee has been able to do is put together evidence, now the same is happening in the Justice Department, of a massive conspiracy before, during, and after January the 6th, from the president through his closest aides. And Cipollone is aware of what happened. And he can provide a dramatic picture on camera in the hearing room of what happened. They've got a lot of this evidence already from his aides, but they want him in the room. But also the meaning of the testimony thus far is an airtight case. It might not get Donald Trump indicted, but it sure shows that his aides were complicit in this conspiracy to keep the vote from becoming real and Joe Biden being the duly elected president of the United States.
Jeff, I mean, if Liz Cheney is right and Pat Cipollone was doing the right thing and trying to stop some of this stuff, why wouldn't he testify? Is it would it be a business decision? He wants to continue in MAGA world getting clients?
Well, that may be part of it. He may be worried about the privilege issue. He may feel that since others have talked about what he's done, remember Jared Kushner said, "Oh, Cipollone was always whining about
resigning,
threatening to resign." He may feel like his story is out there, and he doesn't have to exacerbate his fight with the president by telling it himself. Donald Trump does not have people immediately around him turn on him. I mean, I don't know whether it's fear, but if you look at his history, the people closest to him do not turn on him, and that's one reason why he's never actually been indicted. Here, Mark Meadows didn't turn on him. Rudy Giuliani didn't turn on him, and Cipollone hasn't turned on him. These are the people who could probably do him the most damage, but they haven't done it yet.
Which is interesting, Carl, given, I mean, the former president's, what he has shown over the course of his life is he has no loyalty to anybody who has served him well if he, on a whim, decides that they no longer suit his needs, or if he feels it's in his best interest to throw them under the bus.
There's great fear of Donald Trump in the Republican Party because members of the Republican Party have been craven in not telling what they know about Donald Trump. Look at the wife of Mitch McConnell, who resigned on January the 7th because of what she had seen happening on January the 6th. McConnell knows what happened. McConnell knows a lot of this. The Republican leadership and the Republicans in Congress are afraid of Donald Trump, that he will turn on them, as we've seen in some of these elections, in some of these primaries. He has enormous strength, but he also has a party whose members have been craven and beholden to him, no matter how authoritarian, demagogic, illegal his acts have been. That may be starting to crumble a little bit on the inside as it becomes more evident to McConnell and others that this is a criminal president of the United States who was engaged in a criminal conspiracy to stop the American people from choosing their president. It's interesting to see when McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, and McConnell may take a turn. And let's take a look at Elaine Chao, his wife, and what she did on the 7th of January in resigning and engaged in discussions of invoking the 25th Amendment to the Constitution because of doubt about the stability of the President of the United States.
Jeff,
boy, Carl, can I just say 4 words? Don't hold your breath for those folks turning on him.
Yeah,
I see the opposite. They have decided to make their peace with Donald Trump. And McCarthy, all he wants to do is be Speaker, and he knows the route is don't make Donald Trump angry.
It's more complicated than that, I think, and we'll see in the coming days. But you're right, Jeff, that this is a very difficult thing for McConnell or McCarthy to do. At the same time, they know the cards are falling a very different way than they thought at the beginning of this investigation.
We shall see. Jeff Toobin, Carl Bernstein, thanks. Up next, breaking news on the Uvalde School Police Chief, who authorities say was responsible for the long delay before police went in and actually killed the shooter. Plus, Randy Kaye speaks with the New Mexico sheriff who says he would never implement a red flag law in his county that would block certain people deemed safety risks from owning firearms.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Sunday on CNN. In a year full of challenges, let's salute those going the extra mile, using their platforms for good. CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Aaron Burnett, Sunday.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here. People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly?
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much? Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes.
Now they're pressing in. They want
battle is going on in Texas right now?
A ruby red state gets redder.
Money is what's pushing Texas to the far right.
Why?
Is this about being conservative or is it about control?
CNN investigates deep in the pockets of Texas. Saturday on CNN.
If we meet every commitment, if every country meets every commitment of the Paris Climate Accords, almost 50% of the world's energy is still going to come from natural gas and oil in 2040. And that means we need more investment in this sector, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. While at the same time, we need to be reducing emissions. And that's a top priority for us as well. In fact, the American Petroleum Institute came out with a policy just last year on how you can continue to invest in American oil and gas while at the same time reduce emissions. And we have a good record. In fact, in the power sector, just in the last 15 years, we've been able to reduce emissions by 40%. And most of that is because of a fuel switch that has gone on from coal to natural gas. We want to be able to continue to export that environmental progress throughout the world.
I'm Paula Hancock in Seoul. This is CNN.
After weeks of scrutiny over law enforcement's response during the Robb Elementary shooting, Uvalde School District Police Chief Pedro Arredondo has been placed on leave. The school district superintendent said he placed Arredondo on leave due to the lack of clarity that remains, including unknown details from the investigations. And victims' families are still waiting and desperate for answers.
Everything that's coming out, everything that we're finding out, it's just getting harder and harder by the day. And we have to speak for all these children, all these families. We have to make things right. We need to get down to the bottom of everything that has happened and find out the truth.
Joining me now from Texas is Shimon Prokupecz. Shimon, what more do we know about this guy, Chief Arredondo, being placed on leave? Because he's been obviously avoiding really answering questions. He gave one interview, and now he's placed on leave, but he's still on the city council, and they seem to be standing by him.
Right, he's still on the city council, but they voted on something last night regarding him on the city council, whether or not to give him a leave of absence, and they've denied that. They've denied a leave of absence for him at the city council. So that means that he's going to have to start showing up if he wants to continue serving the city council, because at one point, once he stopped showing up, they could vote him off the city council. Certainly significant for the school to make this move, the superintendent announcing that they're putting him on administrative leave. And simply, Anderson, after what went on here yesterday at Texas Senate committee, where the head of the Department of Public Safety just in devastating fashion really laid out this minute by minute, play by play of what went on inside that hallway for more than an hour. The head of DPS saying that basically the chief made every excuse not to go inside that classroom, really just baffled and confused as to why he didn't act sooner. He said that yesterday, the head of DPS, it should have only taken 3 minutes, that in 3 minutes they could have gone in and could have killed the gunman, calling it an abject failure. So after all of this, of course, today we get this news from the school that they're placing the chief on leave. And ultimately, what I sense is that they want the chief to resign on his own so that they don't have to vote, the school board doesn't have to vote to force him out, basically.
So, I mean, it was startling to hear, finally some facts and information, and to learn, that the door may not have been locked at all, that they waited for a key, that they had shields early on, that they had long rifles early on. that they had enough people, enough gun power to kill the shooter, and that they all just waited. I mean, again, it is so disturbing and damning, the incompetence, and whether it's just the incompetence of this one chief who made this call, or I don't even know what it would be, because any law enforcement personnel in this country by now knows how you go after an active shooter.
Right, Anderson, and it's infuriating, right? Sitting there having to listen to this, certainly for the families, members of this Senate committee who, at times described this as maddening, upsetting. You could tell that people were really, really upset yesterday as they were listening to this testimony. It's just so confusing because no one understands why he didn't do more. The door, you mentioned that door, Anderson, all they had to do was go to the door, turn that doorknob, that handle, and the door would have opened, and they would have been able to go in and kill him.
And
they had all the equipment to do it.
Right, and all that talk early on, I mean, really from the first day of the shooting about the gunman barricading himself in the classroom, that wasn't true.
Right, and that's why we kept asking. Remember, at every press conference, at every moment that we had, we kept asking the police, explain how he was barricaded. At one point, I even asked, really, was the door locked? How was the door locked? No one had answers. But you know what? It took a while, but we're finally starting to get answers here, Anderson.
Yeah, well, again, you've done great work on this, Shimon Prokupecz. Appreciate it. We'll keep after it. So-called red flag laws have been an area of focus in the gun debate. The newly unveiled bipartisan gun safety bill on Capitol Hill includes $750 million for crisis intervention programs, which could be used to implement and manage red flag programs. The red flag laws are aimed at keeping guns out of the hands of those who may pose a threat to themselves or others. Not only reduce killings of others, but potential suicides as well. Randy Kay went to New Mexico to speak with a sheriff who is pushing back against them. Here's her report.
Just let me get it on the record. Would you implement the red flag law in your county?
No.
In Sierra County, New Mexico, Sheriff Glenn Hamilton is refusing to use the red flag law in his state. He calls it ineffective and unworkable.
I can tell you right now, a temporary restraining order issued to an individual that says you can voluntarily turn your firearms in 48 hours is not going to be adhered to at all.
And that's where this sheriff takes issue with the law. Adopted in 2020, New Mexico's red flag law, known as the Extreme Risk Firearm Protection Order Act, does not allow law enforcement to seize someone's weapons outright. Instead, it gives an individual 48 hours to voluntarily relinquish their firearms to law enforcement after being served.
How is allowing an individual self-compliance with an order who is not thinking correctly, how is that saving the community? How is that in any way, shape, or form solving the problem?
In some cases, that individual will turn in their weapon, right?
I doubt it. Not if the individual had in his mind that they were going to go perpetrate a mass shooting somewhere.
But why not at least try?
I'm going to go after an inanimate object, but I'm going to leave the individual who is allegedly in crisis, I'm going to leave him alone and let him cool down on his own. Makes no sense whatsoever.
Sheriff Hamilton argues that giving someone 48 hours to turn in their weapons will only cause them to move up the timeline for whatever crime they may be planning.
But you don't know that for sure, so why not serve the order?
No, I do know that for sure. I have had 28 years of dealing with the criminal mind out there, and I'm going to tell you, no red flag law in any way, shape, or form is going to change a criminal's mind that is dead set on committing such an atrocity as a mass shooting.
But Sheila Lewis with New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence says the sheriff has it all wrong.
There has not been a reported case of somebody running out to commit a violent crime in that 48-hour period because they were served with the order.
What does tend to happen in that 48-hour period?
They bring their guns in to law enforcement and they go to court.
With New Mexico's red flag law, after a person is ordered to turn over their guns, there's a 10-day cooling off period and then a court hearing. A judge will determine if those guns should be returned to the individual or removed and for how long. After the red flag law took effect here in 2020, it's only been used 9 times. In 5 of those cases, the guns were removed from the individual for 1 year. In the other 4 cases, they were returned to the owner.
This is a stopgap measure that can remove the firearm from a challenging situation.
Representative Joy Garrett co-sponsored the bill that became New Mexico's red flag law.
What do you think is the danger in in the case of Sierra County where the sheriff is not going to implement this law?
I think the danger is that there may be a life that can be saved, or many lives that can be saved.
Like the life of Alexia Rael, the 16-year-old was gunned down with her cousin in a different county last month in a murder-suicide by her mother's former boyfriend, who had allegedly been sexually assaulting her. The red flag law was in place, and this restraining order shows he possessed 2 guns, but the red flag law wasn't used to have those guns removed. The Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office told us they didn't red flag the suspect since they had no information he posed an immediate danger of causing personal injury to himself or others with a firearm.
The red flag law would have taken the firearm out of the hands of an extremely upset individual, would have taken the gun out of the equation and prevented a murder and a suicide.
And you believe that girl would be alive today?
I do believe that girl would be alive.
But Sheriff Hamilton still prefers to lean on the state's emergency mental health law, which he says allows authorities to immediately take a person into custody for mental health treatment.
That is not what we want to do. We don't want to seize people. We want to seize the firearm.
Sheriff Hamilton says the red flag law has no provision to treat the individual who is dealing with a mental crisis.
I would much rather that individual be receiving mental treatment at one of the local mental facilities than to rely on that individual to have some kind of a revelation that he now wants to start abiding by the law.
And Randy joins us now. I certainly defer the sheriff on his expertise and over his long law enforcement career, but he's all talking about a criminal mindset. He's not taking into account the huge number of suicides with weapons, and studies show any kind of intervention with somebody who has suicidal ideation can be successful, and they may not do it again. So if somebody's in a mental health crisis, I don't understand his aversion to asking them to remove their guns from their home. Many people probably would do that.
Yeah, I think he's very concerned about this 48 hours that's voluntary, Anderson. He just doesn't believe that people are going to turn in their weapons, whether it's something that they're considering, whether it's suicide that they're considering, or it's some type of mass shooting. In fact, he pointed out a case when we spoke to him where there was a suicidal individual, and his deputies, he told us, went and took that person into custody instead of just taking the means that he was planning to use to harm himself. So he still believes that whether it's a criminal situation, a crime that somebody's trying to commit, or potentially harming themselves, he still believes that this mental health law is the way to go. And he really believes that there should be some type of psych evaluation in the first 24 hours when somebody is flagged with this red flag law. He'd like to see the red flag law and the mental health state law merged, actually, because then there would be a better evaluation early on, Anderson. But the state right now, Anderson, has no plans to merge that legislation, although the representative we spoke with said that she is open to it, Anderson.
Yeah, well, certainly mental health evaluations also sounds like a very good idea. Randy Kaye, appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Coming up, the Supreme Court could release an abortion rights decision as soon as tomorrow that, if it lines up with the draft opinion leaked back in May, would overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade case. How could that affect the upcoming election? We'll take a look at that next.
I'm Ben Wiedemann in Ukraine, and this is CNN.
Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, today on CNN.
The Supreme Court today announced they're adding days that they'll release their rulings from this session. The most anticipated one, of course, is the challenge to Roe versus Wade. Last month, a leaked draft Supreme Court opinion would strike down the landmark ruling. It led to a wave of demonstrations at the High Court across the country. With the added days, we could learn as early as tomorrow if that draft opinion is indeed the court's ruling. If it is, it would be probably an earthquake, is fair to say, for abortion rights advocates and a generational achievement for abortion opponents. So as we wait for that decision, we wanted to get a sense of where the country is on abortion right now. So for that, we turn to our favorite and only senior data reporter, Harry Enten. So what is the overall picture on views on abortion in this country?
I mean, look, the overwhelming majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade. You know, there's a Quinnipiac University poll out today. North of 60% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. But it's not just that. The vast majority of Democrats, near 90%. The vast majority of independents, over 60%. Even nearly 40% of Republicans support Roe v. Wade. There are just no other issues in which nearly 40% of Republicans agree on something and 90% of Democrats agree on something. So there's very clear majority support for Roe v. Wade nationally. But of course, if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, right, this goes back to the state level. So I think it's important to know how the states fall. And what we see is most states, in fact, you see the majority of voters or the plurality of voters in most states, I believe it's 34 states and an average of polls since 2012, say that they do, in fact, support abortion to be legal. But there is, in fact, 16 states, most of those in the Southeast, but there's some of those riding up into the Great Plains states, where, in fact, a plurality of voters do not believe that abortion should be legal. So it shouldn't be surprising if Roe v. Wade were, in fact, to get overturned, that you would see a number of states with the voters backing them, in fact, try to limit abortion rights significantly.
And how, I mean, just in terms of the politics of this, the potential overturning of Roe v. Wade, how would that affect, like, the midterm elections?
Well, this is one of those interesting things where I think, you know, when that leak first came out, we're like, okay, there might be a massive change in the polling, right? Didn't happen. It did not happen, even though most Americans support Roe v. Wade. In fact, if you look at the generic congressional ballot, what you see is Republicans held a 3-point lead before the leak, and after the leak now, what is it? It's the exact same 3 points.
So that's not an issue people vote on?
It does not necessarily seem like an issue that people vote on. And what more than that we know is that when, you know, you ask about enthusiasm, which I think is key, right? Because midterms are not just about who's going to, you know, how people are going to vote. It's whether they're going to vote at all. And in fact, what we see is that the enthusiasm Republicans had an edge before the leak and still have that edge now post the leak.
That's interesting. So, well, we'll see.
I mean, we're going to see. But here's the other things, you know, I'll point out for you, right? You know, you pointed out what people are necessarily going to vote on, right? Yeah. And if you look, most people are going to vote on the economy. Right. It's the #1 issue. Abortion is way down on the list. It's number 3 at this particular point, I do believe.
And gun violence is at 17.
Right. It's 17. But right now, economy at around 50%. The vast majority. And that's why I don't think we're seeing people really change their minds at this particular point.
It's great to look at the numbers. Harry Enten, thank you so much.
That's what I tend to do.
You're the data guy.
Thank you.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. That's what you say.
Coming up, the war in Ukraine on the cusp of hitting the 4-month mark, as many analysts wondering if Vladimir Putin's apparent plan to just grind the country into submission is working. Up next, I'll talk to a founding member of the anti-Putin protest group, Pussy Riot, for her thoughts on the future of Ukraine and Russia.
The Seiko Prospex, by the way, Prospex means professional specification, which is appropriate because this watch has its origins in a 1965 expedition to Antarctica by a Japanese crew. Seiko was the giant of Japanese watchmaking at the time, so it got the job of making a watch that could endure the harsh conditions of Antarctica. This is a watch you can wear up to 1,000 feet underwater. It always reminds me of a Japanese samurai warrior with all those different layers of metal and wood over them. It can take a beating and it can respond. So if you're looking for something that has that robustness, that strength, but at the same time you just want something that looks really striking, will grab people's attention, this is a great watch.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
In a leafy corner of Bawal National Park, a high-stakes courtship is taking place. The future of this critically endangered species in Bangladesh depends on it. The Asian giant tortoise was thought to be extinct in the country until 10 years ago, when a few were discovered in the wild. And now, conservation biologist Shawar Caesar Rahman is on a mission to bring them back.
We realize if we want to prevent extinction of the species from Bangladesh, we must take drastic efforts.
Rahman runs a conservation and breeding center for 4 critically endangered species of turtle and tortoise.
The captive bred critically endangered Asian giant tortoises, which are bred here in our center for the first time in Bangladesh. We'll be releasing these individuals back in the wild.
Working with the indigenous Mro community, he and his team train former hunters as parabiologists, or citizen scientists that collect data and monitor species to help protect local wildlife.
We are empowering them to be the guardian of the ecosystem. I do believe there are reasons to be optimistic, and it all depends on us and the future generation to make that decision and to take action.
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
The war in Ukraine is about to hit the 4-month mark, and with it a grim assessment. This may be the toughest week of fighting the country has suffered since the long-fought battle for Mariupol. Ukraine defended that city and the steel plant in it for weeks before finally falling to Russia in May. Now, many observers are wondering how much longer Ukraine can continue to fend off the deadly grind of Vladimir Putin's war. One woman who knows the wrath of Vladimir Putin firsthand is Nadia Tolokonnikova, a founding member of the Russian protest group Pussy Riot. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison after an anti-Putin performance. She joins me now for the first time here in New York. It's so cool to actually meet you. We've only talked over satellite and stuff.
Amazing to meet you.
Yeah. So when you look at the war in Ukraine, I mean, obviously there were huge failures of the Russian forces and incredible victories by Ukrainians early on in the fight for Kyiv and other places. Russia's obviously having more success in parts of the Donbass right now. What do you see? I mean, what do you see Vladimir Putin's position? How do you see it right now? Is he stronger than ever in Russia?
I don't feel it's like that. A lot of experts inside of Russia, they propose to divide this war in two stages, and some people talk even about two wars. So the first war, Putin has lost it because he wanted to capture Kyiv really quickly.
Right,
and
which they thought they could do in 12 hours or so, and obviously did not.
And there are multiple, the hackers from Bellingcat and other agencies there to try to capture what Russians were talking with each other about. And they were totally sure that they're going to be able to capture Kyiv. So they lost that war, and they completely had to change not just their strategy, but also people who head the war. So it's basically a completely different operation right now. It's a completely different war. And also goals that Putin state for the internal use, like the goals that they announce in Russian propaganda are completely different as well.
Right.
So they stopped talking about denazification basically because nobody believes in denazification anymore because nobody actually understood what actually they're talking about.
We talked one time a while ago, and you were saying that you had members of your own family in Russia who believe what Vladimir Putin was saying about the war. Is that still the case? I mean, that they still believe that?
They do still believe that, yeah. They still believe everything that is being told them on the TV, but as colleague of mine, a reporter, Yulia Yoffe says, imagine if you guys were able to watch just Fox News for the last 20 years. So what would happen in your mind? We all know about how flexible and how flexible our mind is and how easily it manipulated and changed by things like Cambridge Analytica or, Russian intervention in United States politics. And so imagine living under Putin's oppressive rule and listening just to Russian propaganda for years. Obviously, you'll start to believe it.
When Alexei Navalny, who I believe you're friends with.
He is my friend, yes, since 2007.
He's been moved to another prison. You were sent to a penal colony for 2 years. I can't imagine just the terror of the unknown of going there and then having 2 years of your life taken away from you for something you believe in, for something you do. I think for many people it's something it's unimaginable. What is it like to be in a Russian penal colony for 2 years?